Welcome back to Zarila HOA Stories. Drop your country or city name in comments. Chapter 1. The sound of gravel crunching under heavy tires carried through the stillness of dusk. Claire looked up from the flower bed she had been tending, her gloves streaked with soil, her back aching from the long day. Two police cars rolled to a stop just beyond the edge of her driveway, their headlights cutting harsh beams across her yard. A third vehicle pulled up behind them, a sleek black SUV that Claire instantly recognized. Janice's car. Claire's heart thudded. Something about the way the neighborhood fell quiet. How even the kids who had been laughing and chasing each other on bikes moments before now froze, told her this wasn't a casual visit. Curtains shifted in the houses across the street. Neighbors leaned against porch rails, arms folded, whispering into each other's ears as though waiting for show to begin. The police officers stepped out first, their uniforms crisp, their faces unreadable. They didn't move toward Claire, just hovered near the cars, clearly waiting for someone else to take the lead. That someone was Janice. She emerged from her SUV with calculated elegance, heels clicking against the pavement, a folder of papers in hand, her expression sculpted into that mixture of sympathy and authority she had mastered so well. Behind her, two other HOA board members trailed like shadows, clutching clipboards. Claire wiped her hands on her jeans and straightened, soil still clinging beneath her fingernails. "What's this about?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Janice's smile was thin, almost pitying. "Claire, I'm afraid we have a serious matter to discuss." She opened the folder, flipping to the top sheet with a flick of her manicured finger. "You've been issued multiple violation notices in recent weeks, and as of today, the fines total $10,000. The number landed like a physical blow. Claire blinked, certain she'd misheard. 10,000. Her voice cracked. For what? For staining the porch? For the dog barking? That's insane. The taller board member, a man with a narrow jaw and eyes that avoided hers, muttered, "All documented in the reports." Claire shook her head, heat rising in her chest. "This is harassment. I've tried to comply with every ridiculous request you've made." Her hands trembled as she reached for the paper Janice extended. It felt heavier than it should have, the bold black numbers screaming at her from the page. From the porch, Ethan's voice cut through the thick tension. "Claire." He jogged down the steps, his brow furrowed, his shirt sleeves rolled up as if he'd been working inside. His eyes darted from the police cars to the small crowd forming. "What's going on?" "They're fining us," Claire whispered, her throat dry. She held out the letter with shaking fingers. $10,000. Gasps rippled from the neighbors, the kind that carried judgment and thrill in equal measure. Someone murmured, "I knew they'd get in trouble sooner or later." Another whispered, 10 grand, over a porch? Ethan's jaw clenched. He stepped in front of Claire, shoulders squared. "This is absurd. You can't just extort people because you don't like the color of their wood stain." Janice didn't flinch. "Rules are rules. Every violation adds up, and your wife has been warned repeatedly." She tilted her head, voice low and deliberate. "If payment isn't made, further action will be taken." Her eyes lingered on Claire as she said it, as though savoring her distress. The police shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances but saying nothing. They were there as silent props, giving weight to the HOA's intimidation. Claire's vision blurred. $10,000. The number echoed in her skull like a drum. She thought of their savings account, the repairs they still needed to do on the house, the tuition bills for her younger sister that she'd promised to help with. Panic curled tight in her stomach. But beneath the fear, another feeling stirred. Something sharp, suspicious. She had expected hostility from Janice, yes, but this level of aggression, this spectacle with police and neighbors as witnesses, it felt orchestrated, targeted. Claire tightened her grip on the papers until her knuckles went white. She forced herself to breathe, to stand tall even as her legs wobbled beneath her. Somewhere behind Janice's polished smile and the stack of fabricated violations, there was more to this story. And Claire knew, in that moment, that the real battle was only beginning. Chapter 2. The community hall smelled faintly of stale coffee and printer toner, the kind of odor that clung to linoleum floors and outdated carpet. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, washing the long rows of folding chairs in an anemic glow. Claire sat beside Ethan in the middle of the room, clutching the agenda packet the HOA had handed out at the door. Her palms were damp, the paper already soft at the edges from her grip. This was only their second official meeting since moving into the neighborhood, and Claire had convinced herself it would be different from the first. She wanted to believe the hostility she'd felt from Janice was a misunderstanding, a misread tone. But as she scanned the semicircle of faces, neighbors whispering and smirking behind raised hands, she felt that creeping unease return. Janice entered late, heels echoing as she strode to the head table. She didn't apologize, just placed her binder on the surface with a theatrical thud. She wore a blazer the color of deep wine, her hair swept up into a perfect knot, every inch the image of controlled power. When she looked up, her eyes swept the room and landed briefly, almost tenderly, on Ethan. It was quick, so quick Claire might have missed it if she hadn't been watching. But there it was, the smallest flicker of a smile, just for him. Ethan shifted in his seat, clearing his throat, his hand tightening briefly on his knee. He didn't return the look, but he didn't seem startled either. "Let's begin," Janice announced, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. She flipped through her binder. First order of business, property aesthetics. Several residents have been notified regarding violations. Claire raised her hand. "Excuse me, can I just clarify what the standard is for porch staining? We received a notice last week, but the handbook only mentions neutral wood tones." Janice's head turned slowly, her lips curving. "Claire, we'll get to questions at the end." Her voice carried a mocking sweetness that sent heat rushing into Claire's cheeks. A few chuckles drifted from the back of the room. Claire lowered her hand, feeling the laughter stab at her ribs like little knives. Ethan leaned toward her and whispered, "Don't let her get to you." But there was an edge in his voice, like he was embarrassed she'd even spoken. The meeting dragged on, filled with tedious announcements about garbage collection and speed bumps. But every so often, Claire caught Janice's gaze flicking to Ethan, lingering just a second too long. At one point, when Ethan scribbled a note on his agenda, Janice's smile widened slightly, as if amused. Claire told herself she was imagining it, that stress was making her paranoid. Still, the air in the room felt heavier with each glance exchanged across that table. When a meeting adjourned, neighbors clustered near the coffee table, chatting in low voices. Claire gathered her papers quickly, desperate to leave. But as she slipped her bag over her shoulder, she noticed Janice walking straight toward them. "Ethan," Janice said warmly, ignoring Claire entirely. "Good to see you again. I hope the violations haven't been too overwhelming. We know moving can be an adjustment." Ethan forced a polite smile. "We're managing." He gestured toward Claire, clearly uncomfortable. "Claire's been handling most of it." Janice's eyes flicked to Claire then, but it wasn't acknowledgement. It was dismissal. "I'm sure she has." Claire's stomach churned. She wanted to say something, to push back, but words lodged in her throat. The imbalance of power was suffocating. Back in the car, silence stretched between them. Streetlights slid across Ethan's face as he drove, his jaw set. Claire stared out the window, watching the tidy houses pass by, each porch glowing warmly as families settled in for the night. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "Did you notice the way she looked at you?" Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "You're reading too much into it." "Am I?" Claire pressed, her voice cracking. "She barely looked at me. She acted like I wasn't even there." He sighed, gripping the wheel tighter. "She's just power tripping. Don't take it personally." But Claire couldn't shake the way Janice had said his name, the way her smile had softened for him. The meeting replayed in her mind like a film reel she couldn't stop, each glance, each smirk, every dismissal stitched together into something darker. By the time they pulled into their driveway, the house looming against the night sky, Claire felt the unease settling deep in her bones. Something wasn't right. And though Ethan tried to soothe her, though he reached for her hand as they walked up the porch steps, the warmth of his touch did little to chase away the cold suspicion beginning to root in her chest. Chapter 3. The morning sun filtered weakly through half-closed blinds, casting pale lines across the kitchen table where Claire sat with a mug of untouched coffee. The steam had long faded, leaving the liquid lukewarm, but she didn't notice. Her eyes were fixed on the stack of envelopes in front of her. HOA letters, each marked with the same sharp-printed logo. She ran her thumb over the latest one, unopened, feeling its weight as if it carried more than just paper. Ethan walked in, ties slightly crooked, still adjusting his shirt cuffs. He glanced at the table, then at Claire. "Another one?" he asked, his tone too casual, like he'd rehearsed indifference. "Yes," Claire replied softly, tearing the envelope open. Her hand shook slightly as she unfolded the letter. Her eyes darted over the bold lines until they froze. She swallowed hard. "They're finding us again. 1,000 this time." Ethan sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "For what now?" She read aloud, her voice trembling. "Failure to comply with porch staining guidelines. Repeated violation." The porch. Ethan scoffed. "We just redid it." "That's ridiculous." Claire nodded, her throat tightening. But what unsettled her wasn't the fine. It was the phrasing. The letter wasn't a simple notice. It was written with precision, every word cutting sharper than necessary, almost as if someone had made it personal. The kitchen felt smaller, air heavier. She slid the letter across to Ethan. He scanned it quickly, then tossed it back. "They're just trying to intimidate us. Ignore it." But Claire couldn't. She stared at the pile of letters, each one harsher than the last, each one addressed not to them, but specifically to her name, Claire Wilson, as though the HOA had chosen her, not the family, as their target. That night, while Ethan showered, Claire sat at the dining table with her laptop. She searched through the HOA bylaws, her fingers moving anxiously over the keys. It didn't take long before she noticed something strange. In the committee meeting notes, publicly available but buried in a maze of PDFs, Janice's name appeared again and again. Proposals, votes, motions. And then Claire saw it. Special Enforcement Initiative. House number 14, compliance irregularities. Their address. The motion had been proposed by Janice herself. Claire's chest tightened. Why would Janice single them out? And why did Ethan not seem surprised or worried about any of this? The sound of a shower, shutting off, pulled her back. Quickly, she closed the laptop and shoved it aside. Moments later, Ethan walked in, towel around his neck, damp hair clinging to his forehead. He noticed the tension in her posture, the way she wouldn't quite meet his eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked. Claire hesitated. The words rose in her throat, but they tangled with fear. Fear of sounding paranoid. Fear of his reaction. "Nothing," she whispered instead, forcing a smile. "Just tired." Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded, though something unreadable flickered in his gaze. Later, when he had fallen asleep beside her, Claire lay awake in the dark. She stared at the ceiling, every creak of the house amplified in the silence. The letters, the fines, the pointed stares in the meeting, and Janice's eyes lingering on Ethan. It wasn't just about the porch. It wasn't just rules. Claire felt it in her bones now. Janice wasn't enforcing order. She was sending a message. And Ethan was keeping something from her. She could feel it in the way his body tensed at the mention of Janice, the way he deflected her fears instead of sharing them. As the hours passed and the first faint light of dawn slipped through the blinds, Claire's unease solidified into something heavier. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. And whatever was happening between Janice and Ethan, she knew it went deeper than fines. Much deeper. Chapter 4. The rain came in sheets that afternoon, blurring the windows until the world outside looked like a watercolor painting. Claire stood at the sink, rinsing a plate that didn't need rinsing, her gaze fixed on the driveway where Ethan's car sat, empty. He'd told her he had errands to run, but it was nearing 6, and he still wasn't home. The clock's steady ticking filled the silence, each second stretching her nerves thinner. When a mail truck pulled up, Claire wiped her hands quickly and darted to the front door. She tried to convince herself it was just bills, maybe a coupon booklet. But deep down, she already knew. The envelope was there. The same logo, the same sharp lettering. Her name once again stamped across the front. She opened it carefully, her breath shallow. This time, the letter was colder, more forceful. Final notice, pending fine $10,000. Non-compliance will result in legal action. Her knees nearly buckled. She dropped into the hallway chair, staring at the words until they blurred. $10,000. For porch. It was impossible. It was absurd. But the threat was real. Legal action. Court. The front door creaked open. Ethan stepped in, shaking rain from his jacket. "Hey," he said, his tone too casual. "What's wrong?" Claire thrust the letter toward him. They're threatening to fine us $10,000. Ethan, this isn't normal." He scanned the page, his jaw tightening. "This is insane," he muttered, but his voice lacked the outrage she expected. He folded the letter too quickly, almost carelessly, as though he didn't want to look at it. "Why aren't you more upset?" Claire's voice rose. "This is our home, our money, our future. Because yelling about it won't fix it," he snapped, tossing the letter onto the table. "We'll fight it." End of story. But Claire saw the flicker in his eyes. Not anger, fear. She pressed on. "Ethan, did something happen between you and Janice? At work? In the past? She's targeting us. This isn't just HOA business. This is personal." He froze, his hand still gripping his wet jacket. For a heartbeat, silence filled the room. Claire could hear only the rain hammering against the windows. Finally, Ethan exhaled. "Drop it, Claire." His voice was low, final like a locked door. That night, unable to sleep, Claire crept downstairs. She opened Ethan's briefcase, heart pounding with guilt and dread. Inside were loose papers, receipts, and, near the bottom, a folded note. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. It wasn't official stationery, just lined paper. A woman's handwriting, careful and deliberate. "You know what we agreed to. Don't make me remind you in front of her. Jay." The air left Claire's lungs. She sank into the chair, the note shaking in her grip. Her mind raced. Janice meant her. It wasn't just glances, wasn't just petty fines. There was history, a secret bargain, something Ethan hadn't told her. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Ethan's footsteps. Claire shoved the note back into the case, her pulse hammering. She barely made it back to bed before he entered the room. He slipped under the covers, his back turned to her, silent. Claire stared at him in the darkness, her heart pounding with betrayal. The storm outside raged on, but inside the house, a colder storm was only beginning. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just fighting the HOA. She was fighting something far closer, something inside her own home. Chapter 5. Morning arrived gray and heavy, the kind of sky that seemed to press down on the rooftops. Claire moved quietly around the kitchen, her hands busy with the motions of pouring cereal, slicing fruit, but her mind elsewhere. The note in Ethan's briefcase burned in her memory. She hadn't slept. Not really. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Janice's handwriting, that threatening line. "Don't make me remind you" in front of her. Ethan walked in, dressed neatly for work. He smiled faintly, as though nothing was wrong, as though they weren't drowning in letters, threats, and secrets. Claire studied his face, the calm mask he wore, and wondered how many times he had practiced it. "Long day ahead?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "Always," he said, reaching for his travel mug. "I've got a meeting at noon, then I'll be late getting back. Don't wait for me." It was too smooth, too rehearsed. After he left, Claire sat at the table, staring at the clock. Her chest felt tight, with a decision pressing against her ribs. She couldn't sit in this house, waiting for another envelope or another lie. She had to know what Ethan was hiding. By mid-morning, she found herself parked outside the HOA office, a squat brick building near the edge of town. She hadn't told Ethan she was coming, hadn't told anyone. Inside, the receptionist barely looked up, distracted by her computer screen. "I'm here to review the enforcement records for house number 14, Claire said firmly, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. The woman glanced at her, hesitated, then slid a sign-in sheet across. "Name: Claire Wilson." The woman's expression flickered. Recognition, maybe pity, before she disappeared into the back. Claire's pulse quickened. Minutes passed before she returned, handing over a thin folder. "You didn't get this from me," she whispered. Claire carried the file to a side table and opened it carefully. Her heart dropped as she scanned the pages. Each notice, each fine, bore Janice's signature. But what froze Claire was the handwritten note in the margin of one report. "Ensure full compliance by October 15th. He agreed. "Hold him accountable." Her breath caught. He agreed. The words throbbed in her head. Ethan wasn't just caught in Janice's orbit. He was bound to something. Something that had now become Claire's punishment. The room tilted. She clutched the edge of the table, fighting the wave of nausea. Behind her, a voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't be here." Claire turned. Janice stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her eyes cold and steady. She wasn't surprised to see Claire. If anything, she seemed amused. "You've made quite the habit of digging," Janice said, stepping closer. "But you don't understand. Ethan made promises. And when people make promises to me, I expect them kept." Claire's throat tightened. "What kind of promises?" Janice smiled, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Ask your husband." Before Claire could speak again, Janice plucked the folder from the table and closed it with a snap. This conversation never happened. The receptionist avoided Claire's eyes as she left, her heels echoing down the hallway. Driving home, Claire's hands trembled on the wheel. Every street she passed blurred. Every house looked the same. By the time she pulled into her driveway, her chest was heavy with dread. Inside, the house felt colder. Ethan's jacket was already on the hook by the door. He was home early. Claire stood there in the entryway, damp air clinging to her skin, and realized the truth she'd been avoiding. This wasn't just a war with Janice. It was a war with Ethan, too. And tonight, she would no longer pretend not to see it. Chapter 6. The house was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that made every creak of the floorboard sound like a warning. Claire stood in the living room, her coat still on, her bag slipping from her shoulder. Ethan was at the dining table, laptop open, papers spread around him. He looked up when she entered, his face calm, almost too calm, as though he had been waiting for her. "You're home early," she said, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "Meeting got canceled," he replied smoothly. "Thought I'd get some work done here instead." Claire moved closer, her eyes narrowing at the sight of the familiar envelopes stacked at the edge of the table. She reached out, picked one up, and held it between them. "How long are we supposed to keep pretending this is normal?" "Ethan?" His jaw tightened. "I told you, we'll handle it." "No," her voice sharpened. "You're hiding something. I went to the HOA office today." The words landed like a blow. Ethan's hand froze on the trackpad. His expression flickered. Not surprise, but fear. "Why would you do that?" "Because Janice is targeting us. And I saw the notes, Ethan. Your name was all over it. You agreed to something with her." "What was it?" He stood abruptly, the chair scraping back. For a moment, he said nothing, just paced the length of the room, his hand pressed to his forehead. Claire's heart hammered. "Don't make me drag it out of you," she whispered. "Tell me the truth." Ethan stopped pacing. His shoulders slumped as though the fight had drained from him. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost broken. "It was before we bought this house. I didn't think it mattered anymore." Claire's breath caught. "What did you do?" "She loaned me money," Ethan admitted. "Years ago, when I was trying to cover a business deal. I was desperate. Banks wouldn't help me. Janice did. But it wasn't just money. She wanted influence. She made me promise that if she ever needed something, I'd give it. No questions asked." Claire's stomach dropped. "And now she's cashing in?" He nodded, shame flickering across his face. "She said she wanted control in the HOA. That was all. I thought it was harmless." His voice cracked. "But now she's using it against us." Claire staggered back, gripping the edge of the couch. The betrayal cut deeper than she imagined. He hadn't just hidden a secret debt. He had tied their lives to Janice's power. "You should have told me," she whispered. "You should have told me everything." Ethan's eyes met hers, raw with regret. "I was trying to protect you. Protect us." But the words rang hollow. Protection didn't feel like living under threats, didn't feel like opening letters stamped with $10,000 fines. Before Claire could respond, a knock rattled the front door. Both froze. Another knock followed, sharper this time. Through the window, Claire saw her, Janice, standing tall beneath the porch light, an umbrella in one hand, her eyes fixed on the house like a predator who had finally cornered her prey. Claire's breath hitched. Ethan's face drained of color. Janice lifted her free hand and tapped the glass with her finger, slow and deliberate, as if to say, "It's time." The storm Claire feared was no longer brewing. It had arrived on her doorstep. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check Importa. Chapter 7. The knock lingered in the air, even after it stopped, reverberating through the house like a warning bell. Claire stood frozen in the living room, her fingers pressed against the back of the couch, while Ethan hovered near the dining table, pale and unsteady. Neither of them moved. Another knock followed, not frantic, not loud, but patient. Each strike of Janice's knuckles against the door felt rehearsed, deliberate. She wasn't asking for entry. She was declaring ownership of the silence inside. Finally, Ethan stepped forward. "Stay here," he muttered, his voice clipped. Claire grabbed his wrist. "No, we face her together." Their eyes met. Ethan's lined with guilt, Claire's burning with suspicion. After a moment, he nodded and pulled the door open. Janice stood beneath the porch light, water droplets glittering on her umbrella, her blazer immaculate despite the rain. Her smile was subtle, controlled, but her eyes sparkled with triumph. "Evening," she said smoothly, as if she were a friendly neighbor dropping by. "I think it's time we had a little talk." Ethan didn't respond, so Claire stepped forward. "We got your letters. All of them. What kind of game are you playing with us?" Janice tilted her head, her gaze shifting to Claire like one might to a child who'd spoken out of turn. "It's no game. Rules are rules, Claire. And when rules are broken—" She paused, her eyes sliding back to Ethan. "There are consequences." Ethan's voice was low, almost pleading. "You don't have to do this, Janice." "Don't I?" she replied, raising a brow. "You gave me your word, Ethan. Do you remember? You promised you'd stand by me when the time came. And now, here we are." Claire's stomach tightened. The words she'd read in the file, the note in his briefcase, they all clicked into place. Ethan hadn't just borrowed money. He had tethered himself to her. "What exactly do you want from him?" Claire demanded. Janice's smile widened just slightly. "Support. Loyalty. Influence. Ethan knows what I mean." The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. Claire turned to Ethan, her voice breaking. "You said it was just a loan, just a favor. But this is something else." Ethan's face was drawn tight, his hand gripping the doorframe. "Claire, please, let me handle it." "No," she snapped, her voice trembling. "You've been handling it in secret for years, and look where we are. $10,000 in fake fines. Threats. She's using you, using us." Janice stepped forward, lowering her umbrella. Rainwater beaded on the porch, shining under the light. "You don't understand, Claire. Your husband owes me more than you realize. And if you think you can untangle yourself from this little web, you're mistaken." The audacity in her tone made Claire's blood boil. "We're not your puppets." Janice studied her for a long moment, then laughed softly. "Oh, Claire, you think this is about you?" Her gaze flicked back to Ethan, sharp and unyielding. "It never was." The words hung in the air like a knife. Claire felt her chest tighten. She looked at Ethan, searching for denial, for anger, for anything. But he just lowered his head, silent. Her knees weakened. The room spun. This wasn't just financial. It wasn't just politics. The bond between Ethan and Janice was deeper, older, and far more dangerous than she had imagined. As the rain pounded harder against the roof, Claire realized the truth. She hadn't even begun to uncover the full betrayal. And Janice wasn't going anywhere. Chapter 8. The rain slowed by morning, but inside the Wilsons' home, the storm still raged. Claire sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The echoes of Janice's word from the night before replayed in her head like a cruel refrain. "It was never about you." Ethan moved quietly around the kitchen, his tie hanging loose around his neck. His eyes were bloodshot, his movements stiff. He looked like a man carrying a weight too heavy to set down. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice hoarse from a sleepless night. How long, Ethan? He froze, his hand still on the coffee pot. How long what? She met his gaze, unblinking. How long had you been tied to her? How long have you been keeping me in the dark? His lips parted, but no words came. He set the pot down, exhaling heavily. Since before we married. Before you and I bought this house. I thought I could end it, Claire. I thought if I kept her at arm's length, if I buried it deep enough, she'd let go. Claire felt her chest tighten, but she didn't let go. She never intended to. And you let her walk straight into our home, into our lives. Ethan's face twisted with guilt. I didn't know she'd go this far. Claire slammed her hand against the table, the sound sharp in the still room. You didn't know? Ethan, she's bleeding us dry with fake fines, threatening lawsuits, and standing on our porch like she owns us. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about control. And you, her voice cracked, you gave her that power. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Ethan looked away, staring at the floor as though the tiles held all the answers. Claire rose from her chair, pacing. Her pulse thudded in her ears, her thoughts racing. I went through the HOA files yesterday. She marked our house, Ethan. Not us, me. She's targeting me. What? He didn't respond. His silence was an answer in itself. Claire stopped pacing, her body trembling. What else aren't you telling me? The air felt brittle, ready to shatter. Before Ethan could speak, Claire's phone buzzed on the table. She snatched it up, her eyes narrowing at the unknown number flashing on the screen. Against her better judgment, she answered. Mrs. Wilson? The voice was clipped official. This is a courtesy call from the HOA. We need to inform you that your case will be reviewed in an emergency session next week. Non-payment of fines could result in immediate legal escalation. Her throat went dry. Emergency session? Yes, the voice confirmed. Requested personally by Chairwoman Janice Harlow. Claire's grip tightened on the phone. Thank you, she whispered, then hung up. She turned slowly toward Ethan. She's not waiting. She's accelerating everything. And you're just standing there, letting her. Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. What do you want me to do, Claire? She's not someone you can fight head-on. She'll destroy us. Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. She already is. The clock ticked loudly in the background, each second drilling the reality deeper into Claire's bones. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just betrayal by Janice. This was betrayal by Ethan, too, in his silence, his secrets, and his fear. And yet, underneath the rage, a colder thought began to form. If Janice had marked her personally, then maybe this was never about Ethan's debt at all. Maybe Janice had been after her from the very beginning. Chapter 9. The days leading up to the emergency HOA session dragged, like slow poison. Claire found herself wandering through the house in restless loops, her thoughts circling back to the same suffocating questions. Why was Janice fixated on her? What agreement had Ethan truly made? And what was waiting for them in that meeting room? On the evening before the session, the Wilsons' home felt colder than ever. The rain had finally stopped, but the silence inside was worse than thunder. Claire sat curled on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Ethan sat across the room, his laptop glowing faintly, but he wasn't working. His eyes were vacant, unfocused, as though he were somewhere else entirely. Claire broke the silence. Do you love her? The words hung in the air like a blade. Ethan's head snapped up, his face tight with shock, but he didn't answer right away. His hesitation was louder than anything he could have said. Claire's voice shook. Tell me the truth, Ethan. Because if I walk into that meeting tomorrow and find out from her instead of you, I won't forgive you. Ethan ran a hand over his face, his voice low, ragged. It wasn't love. It was weakness. Years ago, I was drowning Claire. My business was failing, the debt was crushing me, and Janice, she offered a way out. Money, yes, but also attention. She made me feel like I wasn't failing. I let it happen. Claire's stomach twisted. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him feel the weight of the betrayal pressing into her chest. Instead, she whispered, so it was an affair. He didn't deny it. His silence was confirmation enough. Claire stood abruptly, her blanket falling to the floor. And you brought me here, to her neighborhood, to her rules. You dragged me in her web, knowing she still had her claws in you. Ethan rose, his voice desperate. I thought it was over. I thought if I ignored her, if I built a life with you, she'd stay in the past. But she didn't. Claire spat, tears burning in her eyes. She never does. Women like Janice don't let go, and you knew that. The air between them was thick, choking. Claire backed away, shaking her head. Tomorrow, you're going to tell the truth. To me, to her, to everyone in that room. No more secrets. Ethan reached for her, but she pulled away. His face crumpled with regret, but she saw the fear underneath. Not fear of losing her, but fear of Janice. That night, Claire lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. The house felt like a stranger's, the walls too close, the silence too sharp. Every creak made her flinch, as though Janice herself were already inside. At dawn, as the first pale light seeped through the curtains, Claire made a decision. She wouldn't just sit silently at that meeting. She wouldn't let Janice dictate the narrative, wouldn't let Ethan's shame bury the truth. If Janice wanted to drag them into the spotlight, then Claire would shine it brighter than either of them expected. But beneath her resolve, a darker fear gnawed at her. What if the real truth was worse than anything Ethan had admitted? Because Janice's words echoed still, colder with every replay. It was never about you. And deep down, Claire wondered if tomorrow she would finally understand what that meant, and if it would destroy her completely. Chapter 10. The community center's meeting hall smelled faintly of dust and stale coffee, the kind of air that clung to old buildings. Rows of folding chairs lined the floor, most filled with neighbors who had shown up out of curiosity, their whispers rippling like restless insects. On the far end of the hall sat the long oak table of the HOA board, papers neatly stacked, glasses of water waiting. And at the center of it all, Janice. She wore a sharp charcoal suit, her hair pinned back so tightly it seemed to pull at her face. A pearl necklace rested against her throat, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her posture was perfect, her expression calm, but her eyes, those eyes searched for Claire the moment she entered the room. A thin, satisfied smile curled on her lips as if she'd been waiting years for this moment. Ethan walked beside Claire, his jaw tight, his palms slick with sweat. She could feel the tremor in him, the battle between guilt and fear. Every step down the aisle felt like walking toward a firing squad. Neighbors turned their heads as whispers rose louder. Is that about the fine? $10,000, can you believe it? Janice said it was more than just money. Claire's stomach churned, but she forced her back straight. If Janice wanted a spectacle, she wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing her break. The board chair, Mr. Hendricks, cleared his throat. His voice carried across the hall. We're here to address the violation concerning the Wilson residence. A fine of $10,000 has been issued, but additional concerns have been raised regarding conflicts of interest. Janice leaned forward smoothly, her hands folded. Conflicts of interest, indeed. This is not simply about a fine. This is about deception, impropriety, and betrayal, not only of this community, but of personal trust. The audience stirred. Claire's nails dug into her palms. Janice was baiting them, twisting the knife before even drawing it. Ethan finally spoke, his voice rough. Janice, enough. Say what you came here to say. Janice's gaze shifted to him, soft, almost affectionate, which made it worse. Oh, Ethan, always so brave when it's too late. She turned her eyes to Claire, her voice dropping lower, but every person in the room leaned in to hear. You see, this isn't about the fence or the mailbox or any of those petty violations. This is about the secret Ethan kept hidden from all of you, but especially from his dear wife. Claire's throat tightened. Her heart pounded against her ribs, threatening to break free. Janice slid a manila folder across the table. These are the financial documents Ethan signed years ago. An agreement that tied his debts directly to me. And in exchange, she let the pause stretch until the silence was unbearable. He gave me more than just signatures. He gave me himself. Gasps erupted around the hall. A neighbor covered her mouth. Another muttered a curse under his breath. Claire's vision blurred for a moment. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The room tilted, the whispers roaring in her ears. Ethan sat frozen, shame written in every line of his face. But Janice wasn't finished. She leaned back in her chair, smiling like a queen who had just claimed her crown. "This fine? It isn't punishment. It's a reminder. Ethan may think he escaped our arrangement, but debts, emotional and financial, always come due. And this time, Mrs. Wilson, it's you who pays the price." The words slammed into Claire like a blow. For the first time, she realized the full scope of Janice's cruelty. The fine was never about money. It was about humiliation, power, revenge, and dragging her into the wreckage of Ethan's past. The room erupted into chaos, board members arguing, neighbors buzzing like a hive. But Claire sat still, her eyes locked on Janice, who met her gaze with calm triumph. And in that moment, Claire understood. The betrayal wasn't just Ethan's weakness. It was Janice's game, a game she had been setting up for years. And Claire had just become her newest pawn. Chapter 11. The meeting hall was still buzzing, voices clashing like an unrelenting storm. Some shouted about bylaws, others about ethics, but Claire could only hear the hollow echo of Janice's words. "He gave me himself." The phrase throbbed in her ears like a wound that refused to close. She sat rigid in her chair, her nails digging crescents into her palms. Across from her, Janice sat in poise, her pearl necklace catching the fluorescent light, her smirk infuriatingly calm. Ethan, on the other hand, looked destroyed. His shoulders sagged, his face pale, his eyes begging Claire for something, forgiveness, perhaps, or mercy. But she had none left to give. The board chair, Mr. Hendricks, tried to restore order. "Everyone, please. This is not the time or place for personal disputes. We're here to discuss the Wilsons' violation, not." Janice's voice cut clean through his. "But it is relevant, isn't it? When a man strikes deals under the table, when he hides debts and entanglements, when his family suffers for his indiscretions, that becomes this community's business." Murmurs rippled through the room. Neighbors leaned closer to each other, exchanging looks that burned holes into Claire's skin. Claire rose suddenly, the chair screeching against the floor. All eyes turned to her. She felt the heat of 100 stares, but she refused to look at anyone but Janice. "You've made your point. You've humiliated us. Congratulations." Janice tilted her head, her smile deepening. "Humiliation is only the beginning, dear." Claire's breath hitched, but she didn't falter. "You think you've trapped me, Janice. That by tying Ethan's mistakes to me, you'll see me break. But here's what you don't understand. I don't scare as easily as he does." Gasps rose. A few murmurs of admiration even slipped through the tension. Claire could feel Ethan's wide-eyed stare at her back, but she didn't turn. Not yet. For the first time, Janice's perfect composure cracked. Not much, just a flicker, but enough. A tightening at the corner of her mouth, a twitch in her brow. Claire caught it, and it gave her strength. Ethan finally stood, his voice breaking. "Claire, please, I never meant for this." She turned to him sharply. "Stop." Her voice was ice. "You had years to mean something. Years to tell me the truth. And instead, you let her hold the strings while I danced in the dark." Ethan's face crumbled, his hands trembling. "I thought I was protecting you." "No," Claire said coldly. "You were protecting yourself." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For once, even Janice didn't interrupt. She sat back, watching, drinking in the spectacle. Mr. Hendricks cleared his throat awkwardly. "We will adjourn for tonight. The board will review these documents and reconvene in a week. Until then, no fines will be collected." The gavel struck the table, but the sound barely registered. Claire had already turned on her heel, storming out of the hall. The cool night air hit her like a slap, sharp and sobering. She gulped it down, her hands trembling. Behind her, she heard hurried footsteps. "Claire, wait." Ethan's voice cracked. She spun around, her eyes burning. "Why should I? So you can spin another lie? So you can tell me what you think will hurt least?" Ethan's chest heaved. "No, no more lies. I'll tell you everything. I owe you that." Claire wanted to scream, to shove him away, to collapse into his arms all at once. Instead, she said, her voice raw, then start talking. Because tomorrow, if you don't, I'll find the truth myself, with or without you. Ethan swallowed hard, and for the first time, she saw true terror in his eyes. Not of her, not of losing her, but of the truth itself. And as Claire turned away, her heart pounding like a war drum, she realized something chilling. Janice wasn't done yet. Tonight was just the opening act. The real betrayal was still waiting in the shadows, sharpening its blade. Chapter 12. The night after the HOA meeting was a blur of silence. Claire stayed in the guest room, sitting on the edge of the bed as the hours bled into dawn. Her thoughts were jagged, fragments of Janice's words replaying again and again. Asterisk, he gave me himself. Debts always come due. Asterisk. When morning finally arrived, Ethan was already awake, pacing the kitchen with papers spread across the counter. His face was pale, his hair disheveled, his eyes hollow from a night without sleep. Claire entered quietly, her voice hoarse. You said you'd tell me everything. He froze. The weight of her words seemed to pin him in place. Slowly, he slid one of the papers across the counter. It wasn't just a contract. It was a confession written in ink. Janice had covered his failing company's debts years ago, but the contract wasn't business alone. It tied him personally, requiring favors that extended far beyond financial. Claire's hand trembled as she read, bile rising in her throat. So it wasn't just an affair. It was ownership. She owned you. Ethan's voice cracked. I told myself it was temporary, that once I rebuilt, I'd cut ties. But every time I tried, she reminded me of what she held over me. The debt, the papers, the secrets. She said if I didn't obey, she'd destroy me. And now she's destroying you instead. Claire let the papers fall. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was there in black and white, undeniable. She backed away, tears welling in her eyes. You didn't just betray me, Ethan. You delivered me to her. You brought me into her playground and made me part of your debt. Ethan's face twisted with agony. I thought I could shield you. No, Claire cut in sharply, her voice shaking. You thought you could hide it. There's a difference. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Claire's chest heaved as she struggled to breathe, to think, to hold on to any piece of herself that Janice hadn't already poisoned. Then, a sharp knock echoed through the house. Both of them froze. Claire's blood ran cold. She didn't need to guess who it was. Ethan opened the door hesitantly, and there she stood, Janice. Not in her suit this time, but in a cream coat, casual yet elegant, as though she had dropped by for coffee with an old friend. Her smile was disarmingly warm, but her eyes glinted with venom. Good morning, Janice said sweetly, stepping inside without waiting for permission. She set a small folder on the table. I thought I'd save you the trouble of waiting for the board's decision. Claire's fists clenched at her sides. You've done enough. Janice tilted her head, studying her. Oh, Claire, always so fiery. That's why I almost feel sorry for you. She leaned closer, her voice lowering to a whisper that cut sharper than any shout. You think this is about Ethan, about money, but it isn't. It was never about him. Claire's breath caught. Then what is it about? Janice smiled, slow and deliberate. It's about you. Ethan was just the key, but you're the one I've wanted to break. You walked into my neighborhood with your head held high, thinking you belonged. You didn't, and now everyone knows it. The room tilted, the world narrowing to Janice's piercing eyes. Every cruel glance, every fine, every whispered rumor, it all snapped into place. This wasn't random. This wasn't just revenge against Ethan. Janice had targeted Claire from the start. The neighbor's judgment, the board's disdain, the fines, they weren't byproducts of Ethan's past. They were weapons aimed directly at her. Ethan's voice was hoarse. Janice, stop this. But Janice ignored him, her eyes never leaving Claire. Tomorrow, the board will vote to foreclose if the fine isn't paid. And when they do, your perfect little life will collapse. Piece by piece, publicly, painfully, and you'll realize you never stood a chance against me. With that, She turned and walked out, leaving the door swinging open, the morning air rushing in. Claire stood frozen, her chest burning, her mind racing. The betrayal was no longer Ethan's alone. It had grown larger, deeper, a war that Janice had been waging quietly, waiting for the moment to strike. And now, the truth was undeniable. Janice wasn't just trying to punish Ethan. She wanted to erase Claire entirely. The final blow hadn't landed yet, but Claire could feel it coming, sharper and heavier than anything before. And if you thought this betrayal was shocking, trust me, the next chapter will cut even deeper. Subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next.